Hey y'all, thanks for coming to this live stream or watching it recorded. I am Justin Dunham. I am one of the founders of ércule. ércule is an organic growth agency. We work with clients on content, SEO, AEO, analytics, PMM, all the things that you need to sort of distribute your message and tell your story at scale. I want to talk today about whether AI content is good enough. This is something that we are thinking about a lot with our clients. Obviously, everybody is thinking a lot about, and I think it's worth spending a few minutes on. What prompted me to talk about this week was Ryan Law's article, AI content wasn't good enough, and now it is. And Ryan Law is an early employee founder of another content agency called Animals, if I remember correctly. And he's been in a lot of interesting places. And he's the director of content marketing at Ahrefs, which is, he obviously has a pretty big stake in this debate. So I want to talk about like how to think about this. Do we agree with Ryan? Do we not? In general, what Ryan says in this article is, he leads with, is this common belief that AI generated blog posts are inherently low quality and inferior to their human-made equivalents? And I think that is a very broad statement. It is one that I actually, in some ways, still think is true. AI content is not as good as written content. Now, there are all kinds of, there are error bars, there are ranges, there's something very different that you're going to get from an experienced journalist, which is not going to be matchable by AI, versus somebody who has just started writing and is, setting up another listicle for you, right? And on the AI side, there's a big difference in output that you're going to get between sort of thoughtfully engineered workflow that includes sources and original POV and is informed by thoughtful primary sources on your site and has a brand guide behind it. Is a big difference in what you're going to get there versus what you're going to get if you go to some old model of Claude and you just dump in a prompt with nothing else. So there are some error bars here, but in general, I think that this is still true. But Ryan also says a few other things, which is what I really want to dig into. Great writing is simpler than it seems. Really disagree with this one, actually. Great writing is much more complicated than it seems. But I think we should talk about what great writing is. And then he says, AI is more sophisticated than it seems. That is definitely true. And then he points out lots of different ways that you can kind of create agents, and content marketing is simpler than it seems. That might also be true. I don't know if that will be true forever, but that I think there is something to that. So as you think about this article and its premise that AI content wasn't good enough, now it is, the key thing I would urge you to consider is good enough for what? Good enough for what application? What is the goal of what we're trying to do? What else do we have? There's a contextualization that needs to happen. And one of the other things that Ryan points out is for things that we used to do, like the skyscraper technique, or writing a listicle, or creating a what is post. Yeah, AI is probably going to do a pretty good job at that. But there are other things that we'll want to create, like our original research, our point of view on a new topic, our taking what our CEO says or our, whoever it is, our founder says, and putting it in something that's useful and engaging. Okay, that might be a place where, you can use AI, but in different ways than you would think. And I'm going to add one more little topic here too. I'll get to in a minute. Okay. So one thing is, this is good enough for what? And the thing is, content marketing is really, really big. There are lots of different use cases for content. There are lots of different ways that it shows value. And I have this very crowded banner that says, is it good enough for a lot of content marketing use cases? It is good enough for a lot of content marketing, especially e.g. the skyscraper technique. So I'm going to show you some web results real quick, and I'm going to share something about myself, which is, this is not our normal B2B stuff. But I get pretty anxious in the mornings. And I'm working on it, and there's lots of things that I do to try to deal with this. But like I wake up in the morning and I almost always feel an intense sense of dread for about an hour, and then it goes away and I start to feel better about things. And if I go through Claude, let's say, and I just say, hey, what should I do to deal with this? You can see there are lots of different links here. But like at least one of the links here is something that I don't know whether this specifically was generated with Claude or with an AI, but I think you can make a pretty strong argument that this sort of thing Claude is able to generate now. Or if you use different AI, maybe ChatGPT. There's nothing here that an AI cannot do, cannot touch. So that is something to just be aware of, is we used to have these like skyscraper techniques, these listicles, these others, what is content, all of that stuff is stuff now that I feel pretty in alignment with Ryan on, that those can be handled by AI, that AI is good enough for this. And I think if you read through a lot of the top results for things that you care about, you'll see things that maybe weren't actually written by AI, but you could easily think about how you would produce something like that with AI. And you look at it and you see the quality and you say, hey, that is definitely. Now, if I look for something else, like let's do a really quick search here for, hold on one second. I'm just doing a random search. Even something like this, I looked for multi-agent frameworks. I don't want to pick on these folks who don't know them, but I think like you can look through here and see, yeah, there is some human stuff here. Like probably human beings are working on the graphics and some of these other things. But again, like take a look at this stuff and tell me that you don't think that we could generate some or all of this with AI. So again, good enough for what? You can rank with it. You can show up an AI with it. It participates in pipeline. I'll show you another thing here real quick. Here is a set of results. And I'm not going to tell you which one, but one of these is generated entirely with AI and contributes to pipeline and contributes to lots of positive business results for that particular business. So I removed myself. I showed you morning anxiety, showed you multi-agent frameworks. I showed you marketing, measurement, testing. Those are all things where I think even if we don't think that AI definitely wrote the things, or at least in one case, I can assure you that did. Good enough for what is really important. And there is no question that a big chunk of content marketing, that AI is good enough to write that stuff. And it's good enough for a lot of content marketing use cases like the skyscraper technique and things like that. Okay, so that's one, is good enough for what? Now, I'm not going to get deeply into this right now, but if I were to look up, let me find a good thing for this. Hold on. Let's just grab another random one here. This is about open claw security. And hopefully this will load up. There we go. You may or may not agree with exactly what's written here, but there's stuff in here that is very specific. Maybe there's AI stuff related here. I don't know. I don't know how this one was produced. And then if you start to look for the things that really influence you beyond this, I don't have any examples right now. Let me just add this one to stage. My take, right? Hopefully not written with AI, maybe written with AI, but this part, probably not. I think you can kind of read it and get a sense. I invite these folks to reach out to me if this was in fact written with AI, because I will be very impressed. But like things that you really care about, context that you are trying to build for people, your perspectives, your data, all of those things, AI is still probably not quite good enough for. And think about the things that influence you, the research reports, other things like that. Think about the things that you might write. I think you'll find that, we're still got a ways to go on that. Okay. So I started this by talking about whether AI is good enough. I want you to think about good enough for what, because there are absolutely some use cases that it is good enough for 1000%. Not everything. There's a lot in content marketing that can now be automated. Okay. But there's a big tranche of things that you probably can't automate or don't want to automate. And so the other concept I want to introduce you to, in addition to good enough for what, is turning the dial up and down. So it's not an either or, and the best content marketers are going to and are using AI to reinvent workflows and picking places where AI can help instead of treating it as a binary decision. So I will show you a piece that we've worked on for a very technical topic. Share my screen again. And if you read this, you will see that it's pretty detailed. You'll sort of have to take my word for it. It's pretty detailed. It, got a positive review from the team that we sent this to with some changes. But this was one milestone on the way to publishing the final piece. So there's a bunch of stuff that AI can produce and do. There are some things in the middle where AI can help. And instead of this piece taking a day to produce, it takes an hour of review from somebody thoughtful and then a update from somebody thoughtful. And then there remains an area where AI is probably still not quite ready to write the thing or create the thing. So I want you to think, number two, when you're reading Ryan's article about turning the dial up and down, you have flexibility in where you can use it. The other thing that I will say about whether AI is good enough is one of the things that AI lets you do is produce content for things that you simply would not have covered before. And I will talk very quickly about this idea that very quick sidebar on an economic idea called, I actually don't know how to pronounce it. I think it's Jevons paradox, I don't know. And so what happens is that making something more efficient to produce actually increases the demand for it because it's now easier to do that thing. And I think about this a lot with AI. And so from a content marketing perspective, you may want to think about what are the new use cases that we could never do before because we were constrained in our production process. And one of them that comes up really often is that people want more detailed information. So I'm going to show you Ércule's Google Search Console. And we just switched domains. So, seeing those increases in general because we're producing more and also because we switched domains. But a lot of this is due to more content production. So here's our just overall impressions that we're seeing. You see some spikes related to some things that we did, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to scroll down and show you some of the queries. Tool to see if ChatGPT mentions your brand. How to see brand mentions in GPT. Google Search Console versus Google Analytics. I keep kind of going down here. How does Ércule specifically target developers in its marketing strategies? How does Ércule's content strategy differ from other marketing agencies? What kind of content strategy does Ércule implement for its clients? All right, let's keep going. We're getting to very small numbers now, but technical audio, the technical SEO audit report, what is website migration? So something that's happening is that people want more detailed information. They want you to respond to these longer queries. And that is a new use case that AI can help you cover and that you wouldn't have been able to do before. So there are lots of these. You can be thinking about paid keywords that you're not covering. Let's get a page up for that. You can think about detailed applications of your product to very specific use cases. Let's get something up for that. You can think about all the jobs to be done that we have, and we want a page for each one, and maybe they won't do well individually, but in aggregate, there's really something there. And then also we're going to do something fancy with AI that we wouldn't have been able to do before anyway. Like, one of the things we do is generate a little demo widget for a lot of pages that we produce for clients. And, it's interactive and it looks good and it mocks up the product, and you can only do that because of AI. So these are the types of use cases that you could be thinking about in terms of whether AI content is good enough. It might be good enough because you wouldn't have been able to do that. Now, what about trust? What about producing things and not having people read it and be immediately turned off your brand? 100% fair. And I want you to think about that. And you always want to review this stuff, but you can make much more of a start on it than you otherwise would have been able to. And folks that we've talked to and worked with who have trouble producing content and actually getting it published are in trouble going forward because their competitors will continue to do that. And there will be more and more out there. Okay, so going back to the article, we've talked about this statement that AI generated blog posts are inherently low quality and inferior. Not totally false. Not totally false. Great writing is simpler than it seems. Totally disagree with this one. If anything, it's more complicated, but AI is more sophisticated than it seems. Some of the things I've showed you come from putting the brand guide into AI, giving it information about what's performing and what's not, giving it a real POV that you have, something to work with that's unique, not rather than just regurgitating the rest of the internet. I'm not going to talk deeply about workflows, but we have a workflow that has a lot of steps, has about 40 or 50 steps that kind of go through and pick different things and pull stuff in and edit and revise and do all the things that you'd want to do. So AI is definitely more sophisticated, it seems, even though we didn't talk a lot about that. And also, content marketing is simpler than it seems. Possibly true, especially for the stuff that we were all producing and that was working 5 years ago. And then the other thing that I would say that Ryan doesn't talk a lot about here is the idea that good enough for what? You can dial it up and down. And also the new use cases that AI content unlocks for you that you'll need to be thinking about because all of your competitors will be thinking about those things. Okay. The real differentiators going forward and how to decide when to use AI. So from our perspective, the things to use AI for are the things that are not your new POV stuff, your high context things, deeply technical articles. You could maybe have AI do a draft, but a human needs to review them. Anything that is truly differentiated for you, and that is the original asset that's differentiated for you, those as much as possible, you want to have humans involved. Although, of course, we all know that your humans are going off and using AI to do the drafts anyway, but hopefully the humans are involved, right? The stuff where we're creating entry points and repeating things we've already said and giving different angles on what we've already said and just generally keeping things up to date and putting down a ground layer of what is this, what is that, here's how we compare to that, here's how we do this other really detailed thing that has a 10-word query. That's a great place to use it because those are places where AI's weaknesses, which are it has no soul, it doesn't really know about your product, it's going to regurgitate stuff, it's going to use the same tropes for everybody, where those matter less because you're trying to get volume and you're trying to get awareness and you're dealing with potentially less sophisticated readers and you have existing context to work from. So that's what I would be thinking about there. That's it for today. There are a lot of other little points here, but I wanted to do an episode specifically about Ryan's article because I think it is very important for us to be talking about. It is absolutely true in some cases. I really disagree with him about a couple of cases, but content marketing is changing this bottle. This genie's not going back in the bottle. And the way I'd be thinking about it is how can you dial things up and down with your AI involvement, be flexible about that. Where does it fit and where does it not fit? How do you have the right mix of content in your content system so you get the benefits of new stuff, interesting stuff, stuff that will really engage people, and also creating a lot of entry points to that original content that you are working so hard to create. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for checking us out. Ércule.com. See you next time.